are listening to the podcast for learning the language of A Course in Miracles so you can understand the meaning, embody the message, and live the teachings as a way of life. Welcome to episode 32 of this podcast. I'm your host, Reverend Jennifer McSween, creator of this podcast, and the Course in Miracles practice coach for taking those who are studying the course from information to application. On this week's episode, I'm going to talk about the empowering perspective that A Course in Miracles presents, what it is, what it means or suggests, and why it matters. Now, A Course in Miracles holds a radically different perspective than that of the world's when it comes to or regarding who we are, what the world is, how life works, and how we are to go about living and experiencing happy, fulfilling, meaningful lives in the world. And whether people describe themselves as religious, spiritual, humanist, atheistic, none of these, or something else, they all tend to hold the perspective that says what we do, have, and or experience in the world affects us in some way. Whether it's the way we feel, the way we think, who we become, or the quality of our life, we do believe, or the world's perspective says that it's a result of what we do have and experience in the world. So this means that we need to control, fix, change, and or create circumstances, conditions, opportunities, what have you, that would allow us to live the happy, fulfilling, and meaningful lives we all want to experience. And that's what we do. Whenever we're unhappy, in pain, or not at peace, or dissatisfied in any way, whether it's with ourselves, who we are, whether we think we're being ambitious or positive or what have you, whether it's in regards to a relationship or with relationships, with a circumstance, a situation, or a condition, our natural tendency is to look for the cause in something or someone or some source outside of us or other than us. We hold the perspective of the world that sees, or when we hold the perspective of the world, we see ourselves as victims of circumstances, victims of conditions, victims of things that go on in the world, events, whether they be those so-called natural disasters or some kind of worldly event out there. And we also see ourselves as victims of the words, actions, and behavior of others. I mean, very often we talk about, hurtful words that are said and the behavior of people, whether they be in our family or in some type of a social relationship or romantic relationships in particular, the way a person behaves and their actions, we often feel are directly related to the way we feel, whether we feel loved, whether we feel worthy, whether we feel valued, whether we matter. And in the long run, very often you hear people talking about, the things that were said to them that really held them back in terms of who they become and whether they took action and acted on their dreams and goals, because the things that they were told were not supporting and made them feel incapable or unable. And so we're very heavily identified with the idea that what is said to us or how other people behave towards us or in our lives can determine the way that we feel. Now, A Course in Miracles presents a radically different perspective. And at its core, the Course's perspective says this, that it's not what happens, but how you look at it that determines the way you experience anything and whether or not it affects you or determines the quality of your life. And this perspective stems from the Course's foundational idea that there's another way of looking at the world. And what this means from the perspective of the Course is that if you want to change the way you feel or what you feel, what you think, or the way you experience anything, What you need to change is your perception, not your conditions, circumstances, or events, or the people in your life for that matter. Now, this doesn't mean that you are to subject yourself or to stay in circumstances, conditions, situations, relationships for that matter, that are not healthy or loving or peaceful. It just says that there's the option, that there is another way of looking at the situation that can and will allow you to experience it differently. This perspective is not only radically different from that of the world, but it's also very empowering. And it's what makes A Course in Miracles unique as a teaching and very transforming. So, as a course student, it is necessary that you be aware of this unique perspective as the underlying, the most central teaching, if you want to call it that, or the central message, excuse me, of A Course in Miracles. You be aware of this unique perspective as you study the course in order for what you're studying to not only make sense, but also to enable you to apply the teachings on a practical level, particularly to those times or those areas in your life when you find yourself unhappy, in pain, or not at peace, and you want to experience something different, something else. You see, the Course's idea of another way of looking at the world in order to change the way you experience the world suggests that everything you've been told, everything you've been taught, everything you thought you knew about how life works, what life is, about the world, and even about yourself for that matter, is wrong. Now, this may sound arrogant on the surface, but remember, A Course in Miracles came into being as a result of Bill's and Helen's desire for and their belief that there must have been another way to put an end to the anger, the competition, the conflict, the lack of fulfillment, and just total lack of peace that had come to define their lives. And remember, too, that until this point, they had tried everything they knew and they thought was in their power to bring about their desired changes. And what's more, this was their line of work. Remember, they were psychologists. Conflict resolution, effective coping skills, feeling empowered, fulfilled, at peace, and how to be happy. This is what they help their clients do in their role as psychologists. So this was not something they didn't know or were not familiar with. This was not new, okay? And what made it even more interesting was that the area in which they experienced the most conflict and lack of peace was in their place of work. And it had become so intolerable and unmanageable that they just about, I guess they've, exhausted themselves, gave up and said, listen, first they became open to another way, and then they became willing to find it. Look, there has to be another way. This can't be it. But they had exhausted all their possibilities, so there had to be another way. Now, Bill and Helen represents all of us in the sense that we all want to experience peace and happiness in our lives, right? We all want to feel safe, we want to feel loved, respected, and that we make a difference, that we matter. And we try just about everything that we're taught and that we learn and that we read about and that we study and, we're literally raised with. And it doesn't seem to work, or it doesn't seem to last. We may have some type of temporary reprieve or release, or you may find peace in one situation, but then you still find yourself, being totally in conflict or worried or something like that, or troubled by some other area, or something that just seems to be, you feel that you've made peace in one area, but it just seems to be coming up again. It's like there's a never-ending story. And the problem is that these approaches, they're based on the perspective of the world, reinforcing our perception of ourselves as victims. And so we're constantly defending or struggling against something in the world that we perceive can threaten our peace, safety, and happiness, or like I said, that we just cannot seem to get a handle on. Now, the course's perspective that it's not what happens, but how you look at it that determines the way you experience anything and whether or not you're affected by it, on the other hand, is an empowering perspective because it liberates you from the belief or the misperception that anything or anyone is the cause of anything that you feel or experience. So, in studying and practicing the course, you must honor this metaphysical aspect of the course in order to experience the peace, the healing, or transformation, whatever it is that brought you to the course or that you'd like to gain as a result of studying the course. Because I don't think anyone just studies A Course in Miracles because, you've got nothing else to read. It is not an easy read. And to come to the course and become a student and study the course in any kind of a consistent manner or in any, committed manner, you need to first feel like the course resonates with you in some way, even if you don't know very much about it. As I shared in my story with the course, hearing about it, I did not know very much about it, yet I felt something resonated with me on a deep level, that something about it felt true. So you need to feel called to it as a path, a possible path for you. And also, you need to really feel that there's got to be another way, that you have literally exhausted all other options in terms of what you were seeking, whether it's the healing, personal inner peace you're seeking, or the healing of a relationship or relationships, or being able to relate, to come from a more loving space or place when you're relating to others, to treat others more lovingly, to treat yourself more lovingly, to feel more worthy. You need to have exhausted all other options that you had tried up until that time. That when you hear the message of the course, or you hear about the course, or it comes into onto your radar in your line of vision, so to speak, you feel, okay, let me try this because after all, I've tried everything else. And so this is what you need to keep in mind when you come to the course. The metaphysical aspect that says there's another way of looking at the world, that what you change is your perception. And the ability to change the way you're looking at the world is the most basic underlying thing the course aims to teach. Because this results in the shift in perception that the course defines as the miracle, which is the ability to feel safe, healed, happy, and at peace, regardless of circumstances, conditions, or even other people that appear threatening. This is the perspective that A Course in Miracles presents, and being willing to entertain this perspective is what the Course refers to as the little willingness that I talked about in a few episodes back. It's the little willingness that the Course says is required to learn this course, or to experience miracles instead of misery, by finding the peace, happiness, healing, or fulfillment you're seeking, personally, in your relationships, and in your professional life. So that's it for this week. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Understanding the Language of A Course in Miracles podcast. If you enjoyed this episode or found it helpful, please leave me a review on iTunes. Oh, and by the way, you can also have an audio-visual experience on YouTube so that others can hear about it, enjoy it, and find it helpful also. So please share your experience. And if you have not yet done so, please subscribe so that you don't miss another episode. Have a great week and see you on the podcast next Wednesday.